Naturally, the main function of the Dialog leveler is to even out levels in the audio. But since I'm going to be covering level and loudness-related processing in much detail later on in the course, I won't get into that here. Instead, I'll focus on some extra inclusions to the leveler module: automatic de-essing and breath control. Each of these features can now be enabled within the leveler window, and each has a setting that determines how much gain reduction will be applied to either S's or breath sounds. Leveler's latest algorithms do the job of isolating the appropriate portions of the audio for you. All you need to do is enable the process and set the depth. I'll demo with breath control. This bit of dialogue has some fairly noticeable breaths between phrases. The leveler also has controls for handling de-essing and breaths in between phrases. We're going to see how it does with the breath noises in this particular recording, maybe reduce them so they're not so noticeable without eliminating them completely. Traditionally, in a DAW, I could try to address them with a gate, but that might affect other portions of the track more than I wanted. I might have to go through and cut each one or draw in level changes with clip gain. But here, thanks to RX5's latest algorithms, I just enable breath control and dial up a depth setting. Completely removing them would be easy, but sometimes that can sound unnatural, so I'll set the depth to -16 dB, which will reduce them a bit so they're not as prominent. The leveler also has controls for handling de-essing and breaths in between phrases. We're going to see how it does with the breath noises in this particular recording. The leveler also has controls for handling de-essing and breaths in between phrases. We're going to see how it does with the breath noises in this particular recording, maybe reduce them so they're not so noticeable without eliminating them completely. Finally, another problem that often plagues vocal recordings is plosives. Plosives are P-pops, the low-frequency thumps that can occur on some letters like P and B, which can create a blast of air that shakes the mic's diaphragm. Plosives can sometimes occur even with good mics and experienced performers, and they're a nuisance to get rid of. You can try filtering them to remove the thump, but that often thins out the rest of the audio too much. My preferred approach, if I have to deal with them by editing, would be to cut the region before each pop and fade in over it. And this works, but it can be time-consuming if there are a lot of pops. RX5's new DePlosive module, once again, handles the heavy lifting. It dynamically hits only the plosives, leaving the rest of the audio intact, and, once again, can make short work of a tedious process. This example has some nasty P-pops. Here's a dialogue recording that's slightly plagued with plosives. Plosives are P-pops, those bursts of air that you sometimes get with the letters P and B. The strength and sensitivity controls determine how aggressively DePlosive will go after the pops. DePlosive can also help eliminate other low-frequency noises like mic bumps. The low-frequency limit can help with that. Even with just the default settings, it does a good job of taming the pops. Here's a dialogue recording that's slightly plagued with plosives. Plosives are P-pops. Here's a dialogue recording that's slightly plagued with plosives. Plosives are P-pops, those bursts of air that you sometimes get with the letters P and B. If I felt that it could get the job done, even if it was applied a little less aggressively, always a good idea, I could lower the strength and sensitivity settings. Here's a dialogue recording that's slightly plagued with plosives. Plosives are P-pops, those bursts of air that you sometimes get with the letters P and B. Though here the defaults seem to work best. Here's a dialogue recording that's slightly plagued with plosives. Plosives are P-pops, those bursts of air that you sometimes get with the letters P and B. And that's all I'm going to cover in RX5. Of course, there are a lot of additional modules and tools, but there's a whole separate course specifically on RX if you want to go through everything in detail. Since RX5 is just part of the RX post-production suite, I just wanted to cover some of the latest and greatest features that would be particularly useful for typical post-production issues. Coming up next, I'll move on to RX Final Mix.